Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. It's time, once again, for another depressing dose of dismal Disney. Several days ago, I released a video in which I investigated whether Disney's and Marvel Studios' upcoming MCU movie that's entitled Captain America: Brave New World would be able to break even, or will it be DOA? And I received a comment on the video from an individual who believes that the movie will do well due specifically to Harrison Ford being in it. I responded to the individual in a comment of my own that Harrison Ford was popular with moviegoers back in the 1970s, the 1980s, and the 1990s, but at the time I couldn't really say whether or not he might be able to draw more moviegoers to see this upcoming MCU movie. But now I may have a possible answer. But before proceeding, if you're enjoying this video, please consider pressing the like button, and if you'd like to see more of my content, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel. And I want to convey my deepest thanks and appreciation to everyone who has subscribed. So before I can attempt to say whether or not Harrison Ford's presence in Captain America: Brave New World might be able to attract more moviegoers to see it, we need to examine the box office performances of his previous live-action movies, which go all the way back to the 1960s. Because if the individual who commented on my previous Captain America 4 video is correct, then there should be a precedent established by the box office performances of Harrison Ford's previous live-action movies. And based on what the individual claimed, either all of Harrison Ford's previous live-action movies should have broken even, or at least well over 50% of them should have broken even, because then there would be a demonstrable statistical correlation between Harrison Ford's presence in a movie and its likelihood of being able to break even. So between August 1st, 1973 and June 30th, 2023, Harrison Ford appeared in 48 live-action big-screen movies. The 1973 movie was George Lucas's American Graffiti, and the 2023 movie was none other than Kathleen Kennedy's disaster of a movie, Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction. And to those of you watching this video who may be new to my Out Loud Geek YouTube channel, that's both my personal title for that movie, as well as my personal pronunciation for it, because it was an incredibly rotten movie that deserved to flop. In fact, it was one of the 3 biggest flops for 2023. But getting back to the topic at hand, to determine which roles Harrison Ford played in live-action movies, I went through his entire filmography listed on his IMDb page, and if I counted them correctly, he acted in 50 individual live-action movies in which he received a casting credit. He also had uncredited roles in several live-action movies, which includes Star Wars IX: The Rise of Palpatine. But since the bulk of his uncredited roles were very early in his acting career, going back to the early 1960s, I assumed that his roles in those movies had very little bearing on their box office outcomes. Though since his character of Han Solo is highly significant in the Star Wars franchise, I added The Rise of Palpatine as a movie in which his appearance may have impacted its box office earnings. That initially gave me a total of 51 movies, but for his 3 earliest credited acting roles in the late 1960s and 1970, I was unable to find any box office data for those movies, so I removed those from consideration, which left me with a total of 48 live-action big-screen movies. Then I collected the box office performance data for all 48 of those movies to include their production budgets so that I could estimate their individual break-even points by multiplying each production budget by 2.5 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, as well as the additional costs of marketing the movie and other miscellaneous costs that the studio pays above and beyond the production budget. And when I did that, I was able to estimate how many of Harrison Ford's past 48 live-action big-screen movies broke even, and how many of them did not. So in order for that individual who had commented on my previous video about Captain America 4 that Harrison Ford's presence in the movie essentially guarantees that the movie will break even, more than 24 of his 48 past live-action movies will need to have broken even in order for there to be a positive statistical correlation between that individual's claim and the actual box office performances of Ford's previous live-action movies. And what are the results? As it turns out, only 22 of his past 48 movies broke even, while 26 failed to do so. So not only is there no statistical correlation to demonstrate that Harrison Ford being in Captain America 4 will be able to help the movie to break even, which disproves that individual's claim in the comments to my previous video about the movie, the data essentially suggests that the exact opposite may be true, that there is a slightly higher likelihood of 1.2 to 1 that Harrison Ford's appearance in a movie might actually slightly increase its likelihood of flopping. And if that's the case, then his role in Captain America: Brave New World may actually have an adverse impact on its box office performance. And there's something else that I derived from the box office performance data that I gathered about Harrison Ford's past 48 live-action movies that I can share. As I said at the beginning of the video, I responded to that commenter that Harrison Ford was popular in the 1970s, the 1980s, and the 1990s. And when I went through the box office performance data for his 48 previous live-action movies, I did two additional things. First, I created a running cumulative total that's calculated from each movie's profit or loss. Second, I created a running counter of his movies that broke even such that each movie that broke even adds 1 to the running counter, while each movie that flopped subtracts 1 from the running counter. And here's the resulting chart that contains both sets of running data. The green bars represent the running cumulative profit or loss as each movie premiered, while the cyan graph, which looks like a stairs going up and down, is the cumulative running count of movies that broke even combined with the ones that flopped as each movie premiered. So beginning with the oldest movie on the chart, which is George Lucas's 1973 movie American Graffiti, it broke even. So the cyan stairs went up by 1, and the first green bar is positive. And from that point forward, there were 4 movies that broke even in a row, which includes 1977's Star Wars 4: A New Hope. And it's actually the only recorded period during Harrison Ford's film career in which he had 4 consecutive movies that broke even. After that, there are 2 separate points in his career in which he had 3 consecutive box office hits, with the first one starting with 1983's Star Wars 6: Return of the Jedi, and the second starting a few years later with 1992's Patriot Games. And the third movie during that second run of 3 consecutive box office hits was 1994's Clear and Present Danger. And that movie, ladies and gentlemen, if you look very closely at that cyan staircase on the graph, was a crucial turning point in Harrison Ford's movie career, because it was after 1994's Clear and Present Danger that the number of his box office flops exceeded the number of his box office hits over time. So from 1973's American Graffiti all the way through to 1994's Clear and Present Danger, Harrison Ford's movie career and probably his popularity as well were essentially continually trending upwards. Thus, 1994's Clear and Present Danger represents the peak of Harrison Ford's movie career and probably his popularity as well. Because after that, beginning with 1995's Sabrina, which was a box office flop, suddenly Harrison Ford's movie career began to experience a lot more flops than box office successes, which, as the cyan staircase illustrates, started to trend downwards, which it continued to do all the way to 2023's Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction. And it was with 2010's Morning Glory, which was the third movie in a line of 4 consecutive box office flops, that his number of box office successes as compared with his box office flops completely evened out when the running cumulative count reached 0. And after that, it went negative for the very first time when 2011's Cowboys and Aliens flopped. It then briefly went back up to zero with his very next movie, 2013's 42, but starting with 2013's Paranoia, his running cumulative count of box office successes to box office flops went negative again, and has remained negative ever since, culminating with his most recent movie, Kathleen Kennedy's 2023 box office disaster, Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction. So Harrison Ford, whose movie career has been trending downwards ever since 1995's Sabrina, has had a deficit of box office successes to box office flops for the past 12 years. This is what Harrison Ford is carrying into his 49th movie, Captain America: Brave New World. And the final topic that I'll cover in this video is age and demographics. In 1973, Harrison Ford was 31 years old when his movie career got its big break with American Graffiti. And the 18 to 34-year-old demographic at that time had been born between the years 1939 and 1955. He was 35 when Star Wars 4: A New Hope premiered in 1977, and he was 38 years old when Raiders of the Lost Ark premiered in 1981. And at that point, the 18 to 34-year-old demographic that had started with him in 1973 was 26 to 42 years old. But by the time that Clear and Present Danger premiered in 1994, Ford was 52 years old, and the 18 to 34-year-old demographic that had started with him in 1973 was then 39 to 55 years old. In other words, Ford's original audience had moved entirely into the next age group demographic that was less likely to go to the movie theater than when they were 18 to 34 years old themselves. And the 18 to 34-year-old demographic that existed in 1994 was probably not as interested in Harrison Ford themselves because he was in his 50s, and they probably viewed him as someone that their parents liked. So it's really no wonder why Ford's popularity and cinematic stardom had started to decline after 1994. And when Captain America: Brave New World premieres next month, Harrison Ford will be 82 years old, which means that the 18 to 34-year-old demographic that had started with him in 1973 is now 70 to 86 years old. So ask yourself this question: how many people currently between the ages of 70 and 86 years old want to go see a superhero movie that's intended for the 18 to 34-year-old demographic of today? Probably not that many, and given that the average life expectancy in the US is currently around 78 years old, what remains of that 18 to 34 demographic from 1973 may be around 50% smaller than it was then. So on top of having little appeal with today's 18 to 34-year-old demographic that's 48 to 64 years younger than Harrison Ford is now, what remains of his original fandom from 1973 is shrinking away. This is clearly part of the reason why his popularity and cinematic stardom have declined to the extent that they currently have. And it's also why his role in Captain America: Brave New World may be more detrimental to the movie's ability to earn money than being able to actually help it. I remain convinced that Captain America: Brave New World is going to flop in theaters, but what do you think its chances are of being able to break even? Are you excited to see the movie, or are you going to pass on it? Is Harrison Ford's presence in the movie a draw for you to want to see it, or is it a detriment for you? Please let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to each and every one of you who has subscribed to support this channel. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, and Blue Sky by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.